chapter. Right, so we saw that the Indian of Rotzen V'Oineg, notwithstanding that there are Hafokim Zemizeh, that the Oineg is Behelem Benefesh and the Rotzen Inyon is Davki Gilui Vizkalas. Nonetheless, we saw that Shneihem Inyonim Atzmiyim. And both of them are mitzad the Indian of Atzmus and Nefesh. Ella, that we describe Rotzen as being Chitonius and Nefesh. And even though Ima Yeshu Atzmi, it's Chitonius because Kol Inyon is Galans. And therefore we call it Chitonius. Not that we meant it's Chitonius in a degrading way, or in a slightly, sometimes we can use the word Chitonius in a slightly, what you might call moral implication into this. That's not the implication here, but that the Indian of Rotzen is what we saw was Marutzas ha-nefesh, the running forth of the nefesh to dvarim which are, as it were, michutz le-ha'etzem. And therefore we saw that since its Indian was his scholars, it came through a Indian shaliseiros, that the Indian of something coming begiloi, then and coming in a even of marutz of his scholars el hachutz mi ha'etzem, then that is connected, or it's around, it's got a shaykhs to the concept of his seiros. In other words, it has to be an arousal on the part of the etzem to produce that marutza, because the Indian from marutza we saw was the Indian of running, the Indian from powerful toikev, and that toikev is dafki because there's, as it were, a isoros mitzadi etzem to produce, or that running, or that Indian towards a dorish michutz, and that needs a certain, what you might call, arousal of the etzem to give forth itself in a even of what you might call alasof, with the ganze brain and the ganze teikif of the etzem. Mashenkein oinig we saw, when it comes into Indian scholars, then oinig tends to be a Indian of ha'ora bilvad. Whenever there's a Indian scholars in the Indian from oinig, then that's not even of the whole pnimis v'atzmias of that koev being begolui, ella, on the contrary, the etzem of the oinig remains behelam. And that was another Indian we saw, that the hafochius of Rotzen v'oinig is in that Rotzen inyon is dafki marutza elachutz, and oinig is dafki de helem betoich ha'atzmas, the Indian from dveikis v'aliyah in the atzmas mamish. Therefore, any Indian of gilu ha'oinig to anything mibachutz is bederech ha'ora bilvad. And later we're going to see that that's the biur why Rotzen is able to be sheilat ala oinig. But that doesn't really mean any weakness in the oinig legabi Rotzen when it comes to the iskalas of the etzem. Even though we saw in the previous chapter that there was an implication when I get to Kiddush Hashem and other inyanim that the inyan of oinig, if it was pure the Indian von Oinig, then maybe there wouldn't be the teikev of the Messias nefesh, there wouldn't be the teikev k'moishu barotzen. But maybe we can explain that as we go along here, in both in this particular os and in the Hemshech Baklau. That's because there's a certain link between Oinig and Seichel. And even how the Indian from Oinig being more close to the etzem is still, there's a linkage between it and Chokhmah. And so the implication being there was that the Chokhmah, the union between Oinig and Chokhmah would produce a reaction whereby the Seichel would play a part in the Indian being as it is that the Seichels are formed levush for the oinig, and even for oinig in its madregas achmir. So therefore, there's a chashash that aspect of it would maybe be mildly on the Teikef HaRotzen, what in Teikef HaRotzen there wouldn't be such a helen. But ultimately, we don't really mean that there's any chalishas in the inyan von oinig legabi rotzen, but inyoni is aliyah ve hisatzmas with the etzem mamish. And therefore we saw a very fascinating principle. I'm not sure if that's what we went into as we left the shir last week, that the oinig being as it is, we can maybe start with that sentence. It's about 7 or 8 lines up from the bottom. Ve'ika hatainug u'shimisanig be'etzem mahusei mamish lo b'bchinas hagiluim shaloi gam lo b'bchinas hareimim shaloi. We saw that, and he puts in brackets, zufrieden von sich allein. The pleasure, zufrieden in Yiddish means to be pleased. The pleasure from the self in the self. Zufrieden von sich allein. Shezeu ha'ineg ba'etzem v'loi b'ma shuhu ha'etzem. In other words, that oinig is an amazing concept, that it's like the awareness of the etzem of its own self, and that's in a form of positivity and pleasure, as it were, what you might call the most ultimate high satisfaction with the fact of his own being and what he is, but not what he is in the sense of the Maila Shaloi, but just the very fact that he is. And therefore, you could maybe even connect that, or you could be tuya and think that maybe means the rotzen lichyos, maybe it's similar to the idea of the will to live. So the Rebbe said, no, it's not connected with that. That's what we're going to see in a second. Now, those are wherever there's a etzem, then that etzem is misanig in its very self. There's a certain awareness, b'derech, positivity, and what we would call pleasure, for lack of a better word, of the etzem in the etzem. And that's etzem ha'oinig. That's etzem pshitas ha'oinig. And all other oinigim are how that oinig is yored and, how do you call it, misharev b'dova shechutz mimeno. And what it tends to do is bring that thing back into the oinig haposhet. It's literally, it invites dvorim suyomim into the oinig of the etzem. Therefore, the inyan von oinig is like a, how do you call it, a feeler or a grasper that goes out to certain inyanim and brings them into its inyan, which is the pshitas of this satisfaction of the self in the self, even without the milas of the self. But I'm not sure if we discussed that or mentioned some of the points in that in the last year. That therefore we find that oinig works in a way that it literally invites or elevates things into its own tchum, into its own what you might call border. The inyan von rotzen is that rotzen runs out and goes for them how they are mibachutz. And the mili harotzen is only when there's been a union between the etzem of the odom and a dova shechutz mimeno. K'moishu b'chutz mimeno. The ilo oinig is that there's an ability on this tachlis apshitas of the etzem oinig to literally invite other things that they come and elevate themselves into that pshitas of the simplicity of the feeling of satisfaction of the etzem. And that's what tainug is. So therefore, we always find the concept of like tainug inviting other inyanim to come into its field. And that's what we saw. When I get to the Tanugi Shabbos, we started earlier tonight, it's not that we deliberately left you in the dark, but we started earlier tonight due to Bakoshes, I wouldn't say it was a Bakoshes Rabbim, but it was a Bakoshes Chashuvim, that we started earlier tonight. So therefore, we saw on Shabbos that there's an inyan of like self-invitation inyonim into the sense of the tainug of Shabbos. And that means the etzem oinig, the Adam bi'atzmai, is touched off by the menucha and the heder habilvu, the inim from Malach, that's brought down in the Mechilta, she'yir atzmai kilo kol malachta asuya, as if he's got nothing more to do in this world, everything is complete and everything is done. If that produces this tendency to go back into the etzem, become a mekimus, since you're not totaled in any inyan b'miyuchad, so therefore you're not going outwards or downwards towards anything. On the contrary, you're like in a form of return, and that's the whole idea of shovas. Shovas is this concept of almost a return into the etzem, and it undergoes different levels. And on Friday night, it's like the details all going up into Malchus, but that's the first main expression of the media of the expression of Oinig, and then it goes up to a higher level within the nefesh. So that Shabbos by day in the Inyan from Dai Sudosa, the Atikur Kadisha, that the Inyan is the aliyah of all the Tanugim Daki into the Pshitas of the Etem in a very high form, and then there's an even Tifera Inyan which occurs, and that's the Suda Shlishi is where the Pshitas of that Etem with all the things that it's literally absorbed into its Oinig then comes down and expresses itself in the details which are still there, as it were, and then you get a much higher perfection where everything becomes only the presence of the Oinig Haposhu, and therefore we call it the Sudosa de Zayir. What Zayir is the Inyan from Midas, that's what the Inyan from Ribuy and Metzias, they become completely conquered by the Oinig. Our actually, the Inyan from Oinig is to bring out of the things into its either B'derech Haloah al Derech Harogil, or Inyan from Ishtapchus Mitzad Amitis Atzmius Oinig into the Metzias of other Inyanim. Actually, its Inyan is the beetle and the scaleless almost, as you might call it, of Inyanim B'tuich Pshitas HaEtzem, and the what you might call the satisfaction of the Etzem in the Etzem. So it's a very amazing concept, and therefore we see that the expression on Shabbos is Azamin Bo Hashti. I'm still inviting. I'm bringing in all these inyanim into the Oinig of Shabbos. Yeah, and the same Zamin. There he says, we say Sadel Sudosa. You have Azamin Bo Hashto. I'll invite. Yeah, and I think you'll find it in a lot of these expressions. From the Arizal Beneged to the Oinig of Shabbos, that it's in the form of like inviting other things in to the Pshitas of the Etzem. Ilul Rotzen is not like that. Rotzen leaves everything the way it is, but Rotzen forms a tremendous kesher between the Adam with Reima Musa, who, with the Zachar, is Dafki B'Metziusay outside, and he has a certain, what you might call, elevated usage or hashpah on those inyanim Eishahim michutz mimeno, and that's what's called milui harotzen, but it's not a inyan shel oinig. The mitzvah inyan from milui harotzen is not necessarily the inyan of oinig. So therefore, that's the concept that we were dealing with, I think, at the close of the last year, and therefore the Rebbe stresses that the inyan von oinig, being as it is, this inyan of dveikis dafki b'toich ha'etzem, and not with the mile of the etzem, but dafki the etzem k'moishu, therefore it's dahainu loy b'mailas ha'etzem ki im b'ha'etzem atzmai, k'moish kos mokim acher. The Einze berotzen, the Loima Asher be Atzmai, Haina Be'etzem Mahusay. He says that's not the case in Rotzen, that we say he wants Be'etzem Mahusay. He does in the sense that he wants to live. That's what he says now. The Gam Asher Lichyes, Harizeh Spashtas. The Rebbe said, even what you want to live is that there's certain values in life which the mensch is aware, and they produce in him how would you call it, a volunteer, what's the word, motivation. They produce in him a motivation to continue that state which is called living. And therefore, the rotzen to live is also like a form of a going outwards from the Etzem Nefesh to something which is called life. It's called Chaim. In other words, the rotzen lichyos is how the Etzem looks at the situation of being alive as a fact which it wants to continue its kesher with it. And maybe we could say that one of the indications of that is that when a person gets into a gewaldige oinig ad kedikach, which touches towards the etzem, then he tends to withdraw from everything, and he can just go up into a where the oinig has so completely conquered him that he's not even aware of what's going on with him, and even od l'maylam is there, that there can be a certain klois, as we saw mitzadini from ava b'tanugim. What ava b'tanugim is these gabras of the inyan von oinig davke, and we see that can just take a person up into a almost a heifer dike inyan of the rotzen lichya, and therefore we see that the bnei Aharon, that they no longer were aware of the rotzen lichya. They went into a certain point where they had the rotzen lichya had no, how would you call it, Kaviyas Sfora by say. It was no longer a issue. The issue was this unbelievable aliyah, dveikis, in the inyan von tainu, which had the etzem nafsho, in the etzem gilu of Elokus, that they were just prepared to go out. And that was the inyan of the Rav Magid, the Rav Avram, B'nai Shel Magid, and the Alter Rebbe, that they went into us, but the Alter Rebbe realized that he had to get out of it promptly, which he did, and then he was mamshit. But it was even from Baal Kochach, it was in a way of compulsion, heipach in ha'oinig. And mitzadini v'noinig, there was no place anymore for a inyan from Chai. Because Chai, to a certain extent, is a situation. Yeah, and a situation implies something that's got to be dealt with, as it were, b'yeshu inyan, shalish pashtas ha'etzem. Over the etzem, metoich ha'etzem, just goes up into what we call oyer choizer, and that can be so misgaber that it just choizer b'li return. It just goes back to wherever it's going, period. That what you want to live, that's also aish pashta. It's also a form of a going out of the etzem to something which is a demandable matzias of it. It's all pira matzia. V'tuikef tainu b'yaser hu b'tainu de'er choizer davke. Oh, that's an akudah. That it's davke in an infant choizer, and choizer can mean choizer mamish l'kadmusai bli, as it were, almost tzumas lev or achiza b'shum inyan acher. And it's very hard to picture, and that's a famous Sefer Chaim HaKodesh, where he writes Barichus Atzuma in the beginning of Pasha Achrei, where he's Mataya, that type of oinig was given by the Bnei Aaron, and he writes as Zolchan Alishenis was Nishtoin Kinshum Sefer, in any period in history, as Al Chazach was a Shaito. It's Mefursa. And that's because the oyer choizer sheboinik aposhet, but atoike with the atzmus oinik is a inyan from choizer, and how do you call it? One way ticket to choizer. It's just going back. It's not going anywhere afterwards. V'zehu says Rabbi Fish oinik hu pnimis v'atzmus hanefesh. Alkeinu behelem davke. He said, the oinig is really the atzmis of pneumius of the nefesh, and therefore it just goes back into what it is, and therefore it's inyan from helem. Because the atzmis of pneumius, mitzad atzma, is moved over tatlis from any other materials, like the Alter Rebbe brings in Perek Nun Aleph, that it's a etzem ruchni poshet she'en as it called shaychus al shum inyan shum material. Well, for certainly not the materials of the koichos for chulo. If you're going back into that, then you're back, and you just keep where that's aimed at a what you might call a direct experience of Elokus. The two just join together. we do see the Inyan van Hamshoch is Oinig. Mensen, after all, he does feel Oinig in certain Inyanim and it becomes Mishkale. Oma shebo mimeno b'Hamshoch hu b'chinas ha'ora levad lo etem ha'tainug. That's not the etem ha'oinig. It's only a ha'ora mimeno bilvad. Mashenkin rotzen. Even the atzmius mamish of the rotzen in Yonah is Hamshoch v'gilui. That's the whole Inyan of rotzen. He's a gilui of the etem in the form of merutza v'hamshocha klape adover mesuyom. Mashenkin the Inyan van Oinig is the pshitas of the etem, and therefore its Inyan is helem, and not helem by the way that something else is malim on it, but it's helem be'etem in Yonah dahaino aliyah, what you might call almost to use the word histalkus b'teich the pshitas of the etem. So atam asharotzen shoylet ala tainug ve'ein atainug shoylet ala rotzen. So the Rebbe said now, based on that principle, that rotzen wherever it is mamish atzmi, because it's the isgalus and the pshitas of the atzmi. Ve'ilu tainug, if it's begila, it's only ha'ora. Now he said, we'll understand why there can be such an Inyan that we find rotzen sholet al tainug, but the other way around we don't find. Ve'ein tainug sholet ala rotzen. Now the truth is that we do find certain places, put down over there in the Hemshech, in Samavor, we do find certain places where the oineg has a certain isgabras al inyan rotzen, or a certain putting of the rotzen into a second place, as you might call it. But here we're talking about the Inyan from Shoylet v'memshala, Shlito memshala mamish, literally obliging the Oinig to do other things. Then Oinig doesn't do that with Rotzen. Oinig can't tell the Rotzen to stop wanting or to want something else. Mashenkin Rotzen can tell Oinig not to have Oinig in that, or to even change the Oinig to something else. And so in the light of what we just said, it's Muvan, because the Inyan from Rotzen always remains Mamish Atzmi. Ilu Gilui of Oinig, that's only Ha'ora. Therefore an Atzmi can be sure that Afa Ha'ora. And the dogma that he brings out down in some of all for places where sometimes the Oinig does have a certain Tuikifa, Aishkabas, Kenegedin and Rotzen, is we find it at certain mitzvahs which brought down that the time in the mitzvah is the Ika, even though the Inyanim for mitzvahs are Ika Giluyom, Le'eishato is Rotzen, the Osid Love will also be a Giluy of the Tainug. I don't know what he's going to say at the end of the whole chapter here, that the Tainug Achmi will also be Mizgalet through the Inyan of the Rotzen Le'osid, or together with the Inyan of the Rotzen Le'osid. But that's another Inyan, that's the Rotzen ha'achmi be'emes atzmuse mamish in the ki achmi, when that will be revealed, since it's coming from such a high expression of the pshitas ha'etzem, that kila the taina will go along with it, that the kila they'll both be revealed as it were together. But one of the inyanim where the oinig tends to put Rotzen into is that there are certain mitzvahs nowadays, upon him, what the tam, what he explains over there, that the Inyan from tam has gotten itself too. Tam is a reason, but tam is also the Inyan of a taste, which is the Inyan of oineg. We see certain mitzvahs where the oineg plays an upper hand, and he brings there the dogma that we see that by Kriyishma, for example, brought down a whole Inyan. If you're not mechavan to the Inyan of Kriyishma, when you say Kriyishma, that you've got to have a kavanah to the amitis concept of the Inyan Yichud. Otherwise, you're not really mekayim the mitzvah, and that Inyan from amitis kavanah and havana is the tam, and it's also the Inyan from the oinig nefesh in the Inyan Yichud. Otherwise, you don't have the rotzen. So we see that the oinig takes a certain leading place over the Inyan of the rotzen. And if I'm not mistaken, he's Maramazah. There's another Inyan which is the Inyan of Sukkah, for example, what the Alter Rebbe brings down over there. That right at the beginning of Mitzvah Sukkah, that when you show Adam Yeshu Besuchi Yechaven, he has to be Mechaven. Yeah, Shezeh Mitzad Anonei HaKoved, Shehikif HaKadosh Baruch Hu B'nai Yisrael V'hoitzi Oisam, yeah, Me'eretz Mitzrayim V'chule U'Biyoshvei Besuche, yeah, Yechaven L'seh V'chule. So it's mashma that the Alter Rebbe learns that if you're not machaven that, you're not really. It's one of those mitzvahs that where the tam has a ikeh, and if you're not machaven in the tam, then you're not really makayim the mitzvah. And to a certain extent, we find by tefillin the same thing. It's brought down the Alter Rebbe brings in Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kaf Heder when you maniach tefillin, then you have to be machaven she Abba Parshi Seilu Kosu Behem. V'yetzivo isanu lehizocher liske lahalis al zichroinenu inin Yetzias Mitzrayim and yichud shmoya v'yichud dus. The whole beauty of the Alter Rebbe is you have to be mechaven b'shas. It was for now a bit mashma that the union from tefillin being as it is the union of iskashus of dveikus in Elokus, that the rotzen sheba mitzvah zu is also governed and somewhat put into what you might almost call a second place by the Isgabus of the Tam, which is the Yonik. Although that's not really the inyan of the issue that we're discussing here. It's not the shlita of the inyan of Yonik over the inyan for Rotz and Lagam. It's not Mahapik or Mashane. It just plays a leading role at a certain inyanim where the inyan of Tam or Yonik has got a Doskufa Mitzad the Kavona Eliana plays a certain role over the Rotzen. Al upon him said the Rebbe, we don't find that the Inyan van Tainug is Shelet al Rotzen. The Hine a Tainug ain't bechelt el Shanis Miroitze Leroitze or Meloiroitze Leroitze. Yeah, Tainug can't alter a Rotzen that it should stop wanting, or from not wanting that it should want. Purely Mitzadoinig, he can't be Meshana. Akumai Mishu Chacham Gadol is a very fascinating dogma that he brings. Mishu Chacham Gadol v'hu oyeves hamuskoles. He loves, and he's got a tremendous love, chayis in reasoning, and how to call it, in the use of the mind in muskoles. She'esh lo itainu Gadol ma'id b'muskoles. Ach eize muskoles hu roitze. What sort of muskolas does he want to deal with? Rak muskolas de kedusha. Only muskolas haraya mitzad kedusha. Be'eshek ha'toira v'yediyas elakus. Either learning Torah how it is mamish mitzad the inyan for nigla, or yediyas elakus, which is the inyan for learning pnimus ha'toira. Or muskolas acheres she'enam elakus. But other muskolas, what they don't, their inyan is not elakus. Or befat mashe yochel lahovi lahepuk melakus chas v'sholem. Or if you're Isaac in those types of muskolas, you might chas v'sholem fall into a inyan shell, a kfira, or in others auch inyanim, they might bring you to the hepuk for elakus chas v'sholem. Eino yiroitze behem klal hu klal. Ve'im hi yoish yoidea sheyesh behem sichliim amukim. In other words, he knows, was for a gewaltige sichliim liegen in andere chachmas. In Lomenzogen, in astronomy, and all these inyanim, there's the moyandike sichliim, and moyandike in refuah, and more gewaltige sichliim, and he would naturally be attracted to that because he has a koch she'en kamoyo in muskalas. Why doesn't he want to learn those? Those muskalas. Why does he say b'shumayim he's not prepared to learn them? The chacham amiti ya'inek shalei b'muskalas hu gadol v'yotzum meid. It's amazing, isn't it? Before that, we said he actually tainug gadol meid b'muskalas. Now he's moisif. If somebody's a chacham amiti, then the attraction to anything which has got to do with the initial muskal is by him gora moyandik attraction. In other words, mitzad the etchem koch was out of muskalis. It's hard for him to be madu bin zelazeh. In other words, mitzad the the Indian van Oinig, and the Indian van the attraction, he's attracted wherever es da in Jonen was. Man darf sich kochen in Havana was sorgen, in verstehen, in Tiefkeit, samig sein, sich in Jonen sagen, oh, he, ach. So the Rebbe said, it's an unbelievable attraction. It's not just that he's prepared to, overlook these inyanim, or das ist gar nicht, I've got my inyanim from Chachma, this is iron work. No, he has if he just knows that over there must be muskolis, then he would be ready for mitzad the inyan von oinig, an attraction as you might call it, he's ready for it. Nadarabba, it's a gewaldige attraction that he would have to that. But it's not going to help, even though he knows. And Vipal says a Chacham Amiti, he's got a certain, what you might call, a realization at a time, and the unbelievable time was Tutzakdot. And he's right, that purely, he's it. And was a gator nicht auf die alle Inyanim, because there's a Rotzen Amiti by him. What that Rotzen says, we want Moshiach now, we want Elikus. We want all the Inyanim which is Elikus, anything which is Chutz from Elikus. Lorote. It's this unbelievable attraction and Oineg and that. So he said, no, the Inyan van Rotzen, is Shoilet o Mavatel, that Oinig Legami. And nicht Neusen Mokim, and therefore, it takes the Inyan van Oinig and turns it into Loy Oinig. He couldn't possibly allow himself to feel any of that Oinig, and it becomes a dough which is completely mufach etzloi. Amir said, the Rebbe, Lo yoyu kol zeh li eish lo chas v'sholom rotzen l'zeh. Mipnei retzoineh ha'atzmi shereitze rak be'elakuz. V'kol mashu eifach elakuz eina reitze b'shum oifah. So here we see a very amazing Indian. He says that it's not a pshat that Chachomim don't have the, what you might call the nisyones, and they don't have the, they don't. He said it's not the pshat that a Chacham Amiti is just moved out by etzem definition from all other forms of Chachma. No? He knows where Wusset Chachma had he could schmeckt us for all day. We're dashi Esham Chachma. And he's even got a certain ability to picture what's the dot in of Chachma. And the father's a tiny ochim binyonim ele. Umamira, there's a gewisse, what you might call readiness mitzad the Inyan van to go for that. After became the Inyan van Rotz is a b'shumay v'nid. That will never be the case. V'chule. So here we see that the Rebbe doesn't say that mitzad rotzeinei be'elakus, he just would never think of anything else. He says no, he has be'emes ha'oinig, and that oinig is aware of what it has. After became the rotzen is mavatel does. Therefore, it's a dugma amiti of our principle that the rotzen is sheilet af inyan ha'oinig. Or if he doesn't l'chatchila have oinig ahin, what's it the dugma? Ain't the dugma amiti? That the greater the mind, as you might say, the more the nisoyen is in keeping things only pure mitzad kedusha. It's a very fascinating inyan. It's not that he doesn't have a nisoyen v'dova, or the inyan for rotzen is sheilet from one nemtzach the nisoyen from oitzim ta'anugoi b'inyan ha'muskol. So therefore we have to say that maybe derech achorayim, derech nafila, and how would you call it? Kol l'sheina shel chitzenis for nafila. That's how it is. That these great Chachmei Torah know certain inyanim in other Chachmas, even though they've never, actually spent their time, being busy with these Chachmas and not getting periods of their life after them. And after became, we see that there's like a certain yediyah almost mitzad atzmi that they have in all sorts of inyanim. Like we see by the Rebbe Melech HaMashiach. He used to have, opinions and days and all sorts of verschiedene inyonim, was eino mistaba klal, to say that he spent time, mamish studying books and reading up on all these chachmas. And the same was given by andere chachom, chachma HaTorah. They had ideas. We find by the Tanoim V'Amoraim that they had all sorts of ideas and verschiedene inyonim, which eino min a klal mistaba, to say that they spent time studying those inyonim. So we have to say that because of the unbelievable amshocha to inyonim of muskolas, then their nefesh automatically is drawn to certain inyonim, and al chaponim appreciate even mitzad the koyach muskolas and the tainus of muskolas inyonim musuyomim in these inyonim. What the Eibishter kilo is mati that or lost that is a treffen that should occur, because later on it's going to have some sort of place, and mitzad that, the Nesoyin is very great, because they know what's going on over there. There's certain, as it were, flawless and even protestic ideas, because of the unbelievable tainu that wherever there's muskalis and wherever it's acting, azah nefesh, neshama, is automatically there and part of it. We could say that that's the ulai b'derech efsher. That's the biyavador. So some people want to fragen
if they never learned it.
Huh?
If they never learned the actual
knowledge. That's what I'm saying. They did learn it. Mitzad the oinig and mitzad the u'usadum scholars. But not that they sat and learned it, but their mind had to get right out in a bishul, but then it was sure the whole thing. That they were kilo, how do you call it, ba'havora be'om, mitzad the oinig and muskolas, they sort of, what you might call, they tasted everything ba'havora. Yeah. That havora baz, I mean, kofa, that was what he koine, becoming yonim chashuv. Some people ask the Rebbe learned when he was in the university, he learned this thing with certain, what was it, the nautical science, with the new ways. So it's Yidua that the Rebbe never really learned the whole thing when he was sitting in this, and it used to annoy them, if I'm not mistaken. The professor, they were zicher that he wouldn't know, because they considered he was always cooking on something else. And yet when it came to the test, he exploded all of them. He just blew them, And talks man, because one of the professors eventually asked the Rebbe, how does he do it? And so he answered that Dafki, because he's zikir, he's saskis, he knows he looks at B'shas, he is. Well, that's how he said with the fire. So that would fit very nicely with the pshat that we're saying here. But there is a certain mitzad. Therefore, the Rebbe says, "Otzum v'godol ma'id." I mean, he really plays it up here. Yeah? There's a tremendous, wherever it's going, the mark, as you might call it, the marketplace, wherever it's going, muskola is as neshama is attracted to him and gives a sort of, how do you call it, Havara Be'alma gives a Ba'arfadur, as they say, all these different chotmas. And Bamera, the magnet draws in certain inyonim which are, as you might say, necessary. They should be there on his computer screen. And Bamera thought weiter, aber Mamish abgeben sie mit dem that the Rotzen is so strong, as it does sehr low. Aber man hat the Tainus, who is the no Muskoi? There's been a certain Mashiach, the evidence, give me that for durch Bekan over Bekan. It's very hard for us to picture the Guidalized Kashras from a Chacham Amiti in the Inim of Chacham of Muskal. It's hard for us to imagine. It's like a tremendous drawing point that it automatically draws in the necessary inyanim, which are nitzrach al pi hashgacha alyona l'chaim shel chacham hahu u'mamer lahashpos b'kol ha'olam kulo. Kein yesh loimer al chapanim b'derech efsher. However, says the Rebbe, v'kol mashu eipech al zen v'yishane. K'moy Kain, says the Rebbe, lo yishtana miroitza lo loyroitza. He's not going to, from loyroitza, he's not going to be mishtane. I'm sorry, from wanting something, he's not going to go to not want it. Hu sharotzen atzmi de benishamis Yisrael elakus lo nishtane v'lo nishapek li'olam. But that rotzen atzmi, what you didn't have to elakus, that will never be altered, and will never be nishapek li'olam. Gam beribui tanugim gashmiyim. Even if he gets mamish verzunken completely in Olam Hazeh, and his whole, what appears to be his whole being is only tanugim, gashmiyim, or they will never be able to wipe out the rotzen atzmi pnimi to elikus. Acham Yishakosov, the famous Biyuv, the famous Raya, Mayim Rabim, the ribui retainers v'tayvus oris are those Mayim Rabim. Von der Tayvus oris lo yuvle l'chabis ohav v'rotzena atzmi. In other words, no matter how verzunken you might become in the oinig of those inyonim, that will never change ultimately the rotzen. Akamei says the Rebbe Shon Roim gam bekal shebekalim or kalim shebekalim hamushkoim rachmonin islam beribi tayvus v'tanugim gashmiyim. In other words, it's well known, the famous Pisgah, a kal shebekalim, that even amongst the kalim, they say he's a kal. They feel amongst the kalim, he's reckoned as a kal. They say, oh yeah, legabihim, we're nishkoshi, we're from legabihim. Yemele kalim shebekalim, but the ribu tanugim gashmiyim elafamim v'lefiyomim kimoi b'zman hasimcha kahai gavna similar to a kimuvan hasimcha gedoyle b'chayo yehari heim mishkarvim liyirei elakim. If there's rabbanim or elach yidin or something at the simcha, then they'll definitely want to be sort of have to do with them. They want to definitely be close to them and show that they have a shaykhs to such people. Medabrim b'shvachim shal yiras elakim. They'll say, oh, see that chassid was for a yid and a wonderful person he is. He's a emerson Yiras Shamayim. They'll praise him.
You see it Simchas Torah.
Yeah.
All the like in the kfar, all the guys that are not so into learning.
Yeah.
They have a few lachaim, they come to the Fabri and they start getting close to the Mishpin.
Yeah, they try to get close to the Mishpin. They try to get a good word. Yeah. It's I mean, all these inyanim are dvarim amiti, chemur and poshet. So it's not theoretical ideas. If you have medabrim b'shvachim shel yiras elakim b'kiyum hamitzvahs v'eishagam hu retaining b'zeh. He says, yeah, I also want to be that way. Actually, maniyas v'kuvim. I got these guys to realize got all these maniyas v'kuvim of really einach. I'd also like to be that. I'd like to be like that. Because einu sheker b'nafshay chas v'sholem. So that I was not sheker. He's not just putting that on or just saying it. Daemus who shall reach a belakuz ki arotzena atzmi yesh boy v'im yesh nishka v'nevad me'id mikol mochim yesh nei boy, or the rotzen atzmi telakuz is by him. Zehu says the Rebbe to liyosid kasha yitocha b'shefer godel. What yitocha b'shefer godel means that there'll be a tremendous gilei lakus in the world, kilu l'mayla mikol ameniyas v'kuvim. Even a mensch like him will be aware that there's a tremendous ishgalus of elikus taking place. Even those who are lost in the ashrei, in the tainuk, of this world, eretz ashur, the mamish involved in the whole inyan, till they're never rachmanin itlan, shubachinas atainuk, the avudim rachmanin itlan betanugim agashmiyim. Yavoyu kashei gilei elikus. In other words, a shefer godel means gilei elikus. When there'll be a gilei elikus, they will also come. Why? Because they really wanted to come even before. They really wanted to have a shaykhus mitzad the rotzen atzmi, but they just mitzad chushes koi choisom other inyanim, they were unable to mamish live with the rotzen b'poyo. And therefore they were called Oivdim. Harei da Tainuk Einu Shoilet ala Rotzen L'Shanoi. The Tainuk, even though it can be a tremendous Tainuk, is one of the Tainugi Eilam Hazeh having themselves a Toikir. A Toikir, got there. Nonetheless, says the Rebbe, the Tainuk doesn't have in itself that power to be Shoilet ala Rotzen. So we see then, notwithstanding the chusha of that rotzen. I mean, why is it that only Simchas Torah he reveals that rotzen? And why is it that he's Meshukei Rachmanin Etzlam B'Kol Inyonei Tanugim? Because the rotzen mitzad eize siba shaloi tiyeh is an from chusha legabei. And the from the Tainugim are in a state of iskabras. Nonetheless, says the Rebbe, that doesn't really be, it's not really Mishana the Rotzen. It's Fadreitnich the Rotzen from Roitze Leloi Roitze. All it does is Matish the Rotzen. And that's what the Alter Rebbe's Maram is in Tanya Perek Yud Ches and Yud Tes. It's of course what he calls out there, the Chochmah Shebenefesh. And the Lamaila Mi Tam V'Hasogya, you can't be Mashana that. All you can do is you can put it into dormancy. It can be in like he said, Ukayoshin or Chulu. But you can't be Mashana it. It's what Nishtana mi Zelazeh. And like he's Mavair over there, that the Ra can be Nefak Latoi. You can be Mahapak the Ra Latoi. Or the Toiv Lara Rachmanin and Nitchaychazazah. In other words, the Riboy Tanugim, what he's Malvedot in Perek Yud Aleph, Afilo Rosha, Rachmanin and Tlanshaim Boim Lo Richuva, the Rosha Varaloi, what happens to the Nefesh Elokis by him is she's Yechikilu V'Eim B'chinas Makif Mibuchutz. I say, listen to listen. And the Nefesh Elokis Kilu has to flee the situation. And therefore her shlita and her what you might call her deya b'hamatzav is a dova cholish mutash be'etzem minyone, but not because she's been mishtane be'etzem ma'usa. She's how do you call it, retreated from a matzav mitzad goydel iskabes of a dova zar, but not that she's in any way been mishtane be'etzem minyone. It's only what you might call a chalish is in the bitui of inyona, of an ish was that's a minyona. The Rebbe does it a pshat that the Tanugim can, they can be shoilet after rotzen benegel lechalishus, of an ish lishanoisi mizeleze, nish mi roitze leloi roitze, rachmanin lanchasho nichar dovah kese. Amamire v'harotzen shoilet ala oinig. However, the other way around. We saw that the Inyan van Rotzen can be Mishane, the Inyan van Oinig Mamish, Mina a Godla Habitu Shaloi Lagam. But that was already an akuda of not allowing a Kiruv Lihainian Shiesh Lainig, and what you might call a Mania and a Beetle Shalinian Oinig. But the point that's being mishchadish now is the Rebbe says that there can be a koyach in the rotzen, even l'shaneis as a oinig leheifach shaloi. Because tzar is the heifach of oinig. And it's more and so sometimes we soll nicht wissen that the Indian von tzar has gotten itself a certain oimek, I feel like avi oinig b'derech harogim. And therefore he said to be meshane a'inim von oinig l'tzar or afuch. Das ist a'inim was is in etzem ma'mahus mea heifach el heifach. He said that can happen. But oinig can never be meshane a'inim von roitze l'loi roitze. And so that's what we're going to see is the teretz, that the biyu b'zeh is that any form of gilu ha'oineg is only a ha'ora. Mashiach rotzen etzem minyone is lehizgalis k'moshu. Rotzen etzem minyone is gilu mia etzem shaloi im kol ha'teikev shaloi b'kol bitui shaloi. Oib das is a rotzen ha'atzmi, the ganze etzem steht dort. If that's the case, says the Rebbe, that's got the power to be Mashana Aha or a Bulhat. And that's what he says now. Yeah, it's interesting. Siddur usually plays down Sigufim of Al Chaponim. Mizman Lesman, it mentions them, b'derech, how would you say, COVID Masuyam, yeah? So you can't just rule it out completely. It says, B'inyan Asigufim, Dimi Yoish Tza'al Nefesh, Harihu, yeah, Loi La'oineg, Mipnei Sheroitzem Oid B'tikun Nafshoi. Mamere, Hu Rotzeh V'nefesh Shelo. Yeah, like we saw, the Rotzen, in Kiyum Chayov, is a ina for the Rotzen Atzmi. Mamere, Hu Rotzeh B'tikun Nafshoi, is a ina which is normally a ina Shel is by him becomes ukamoi sheitiru tainus cholim v'Shabbos mipnei shu oineg gloi. Shabbos, korosel Shabbos oineg. The whole inyan from Shabbos is only to be in a matzav from tainu oineg. Over the inyan from tainus is heipach inyan now. Over where's the inyan from tikkun? Tikkun nafshe with the cholim that he had at night was there's cholila, some inyan from kapeda which could bring to a nezik or a chesvot. And Vibala says chofet berotzen pnimi be'etzem ha'toiv shaloi be'etzem ha'tikun shel ha'toiv shaloi. Therefore he's allowed to fast a tainus cholim on Shabbos. On a tainus cholim on Shabbos is mamash ha'ipach ha'inin shel Shabbos. It's a inyan from taking the inyan from tzar and seeing that as a tainus. In other words, the tzar in the inyan from tainus is heipach in Shabbos. Or Vibala, he sees that connected with tikkun nafshe, then that becomes his tainus Shabbos. Or their tzar, that becomes his tainus Shabbos. An afu pikein, it's nechshav as a certain pagam, because he has to be meisiv tainus l'tanisa, like there's a state in Allah barina, the ganze view and them, that you have to fast another tainus to be muslim for them tainus. And like state in the Rebura Chosi, state in the Sefer Rebura Chosi, we state this good. They state that why is it that the tainus cholim helps? Is that Kaviochel, the Eibster, is the Eibster is kilo misanig on Shabbos in the tainus karoshel Shabbos einig koyre mamshik the Kaviochel the tainus shelamayla in the inyanim for Shabbos. Amel lemayla kilo they misanig in the inyanim for the it's over Vibala the mensch he's right to kokach betainug nafshe. Then that's looked at Momayla Kaviochel, the Eibster zetem, the kilo that he's being Mekayim all the inyanim from Shabbos, but how do you call it? Behida, and he's being moisiv Kaviochel in the Eibster. I mean, oinig. They state in the Sefer City from Rabbi Yehuda. Amir Zetman that mitzad that rotzen amiti, what the Eibster versteht was, he wants bekiyuma v'hed nazikin shaloi v'chulu. Well, that becomes the time of shalamata and the time of shalamata. How did that happen? Only through the inyan from rotzen.
So, more currently eating of dry matzahs and schmaltz.
Dry matzahs?
Schmaltz on Pesach is also time of Godot and everything.
What do you mean schmaltz? You mean that you can't put schmaltz on your matzahs?
You don't. It's a time of Godot.
What's a schmaltz? Schmaltz is like fat. Yeah, fat is a retivas, Mr. Right. I don't know, maybe schmaltz is you're like a matzah.
So Pesach, it's time of Godot, it's an oilig.
Yeah, it's a mirror. So what you want to taina is that on, even though the inyan and chewing the hard matzahs is a tza'aloi, but the fact that it's matzah zush on the way, it's never for taina godel. That's what you want to taina. Okay. Yeah. How do they say it at Mirz Hashem? We should be eating the matzah betatlis hatainu. We should eat them in a matzah that there won't be any shayla, but it'll be tatlis hatainu. You don't have to worry about your teeth and all that. Not about kind under inyanim.